Hi everyone, Wonia Thibault here. It is Thursday, June 27th, and later this evening will be the 4th episode of Alone Season 6. So up until the premiere, I was doing a series of videos every day about my prep and kind of my process around getting ready for the show. And then I haven't been doing any since the premiere, partly because shortly after I went on a big tour to do a bunch of teaching, went up to teach in Alberta, Canada, and then to the Methow Valley in Washington to teach at Saskatoon Circle, an ancestral skills gathering, and I am still in the lovely Methow Valley now. So that meant that I didn't actually see any of the episodes besides the premiere until just recently. So I had my big debut on episode 3, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we saw there before the next one comes out tonight. So as with anything in something like this, there's so much more to one's experience than can possibly be shown on film. And I didn't even get shown until I think day 9, so all of the time before that was just kind of a wash. But I thought I would just talk a little bit about some of that and kind of catch you up a little bit more information about some of the things that we saw on that episode 3. So one thing is that my plan going in was to put a lot of energy towards my shelter early on, because I knew that hard snow and hard Arctic winter could hit at any point. And as it was, as you probably saw, we woke up on day 3 to a good snowfall. I woke up with a pretty good powdering on top of my sleeping bag. So that just really steeled my motivation to get that shelter as dialed as I could, as quick as I could. So I wasn't putting a lot of energy towards bringing in food until day 4 or 5 or so. That was my plan going in, which was part of why I brought pemmican as one of my items, so that I could really focus on shelter and not worry as much about food. However, I was certainly eating a lot of berries early on. There were cranberries and crowberries at my site in abundance. Saw a lot of people with access to a lot of blueberries, and I must say it kind of made my stomach knot a little bit, because I would have been thrilled to have so many blueberries. The berries that I had were mostly pretty darn sour and did not have a lot of calories to them. So I was eating them, but I wasn't spending a lot of time focusing on them because they weren't really doing that much for me. By about day 4 or 5, I started putting a lot of energy towards fishing. I made 2 different fishing poles, one that I left on the north shore of the little peninsula I was on, and one that I left on the south shore, so that I wasn't trudging through thick spruce sphagnum forests, sphagnum bogs with spruce forests, with a fishing pole, getting hung up on things. So I spent a lot of time making lures, like you saw a lot of the other folks doing. I found one Pepsi can floating near shore, and I turned that into a lure using the scissors on my Leatherman. So I had some nice flashy lures. I used my paracord and thread and bits of fluff, bits of bright colored wool from my sweaters to tie lures. And every time I would cast, I would lose my lures, because my area happened to be really, really shallow with a lot of big jumbly rocks. It looked kind of similar to Nikki's area in watching the films in terms of the really shallow with a lot of rocks around. And I started using weights to get my lures to sink better, but then that just made them stick even more. So then I carved floats out of dead willow that were just kind of a cylinder of willow. And then I would narrow one end and drill a hole through using the awl in my Leatherman. And then I would tie those on, trying to find the exact right ratio of weight to float and length for my lure, so that I could not get my line caught up in those rocks. But it was so shallow. I was on a peninsula, and I tried every imaginable spot all around that peninsula, and all of it was just like 1.5 feet deep everywhere around. Basically, no good deep water for fishing. There were some marshy reeds that could have been good for pike, but they were so marshy that I couldn't really get out to them. So yeah, fishing was really not happening, and I tried day after day after day with so many different setups and types of lure, float, weight combinations. Yeah, it was definitely hard, and it was definitely frustrating, but I kept after it. And I peeled a lot of birch trees. So the first birch tree that I peeled was pretty early on to make a moose call for hunting moose. And the tree that you saw me peeling in episode 3 was probably about the 3rd or 4th tree that I peeled, because I was trying to amass some birch bark for making dishes and potentially water vessels and food storage vessels. And that was the first time that any of them had any sap. Usually the time to get sap out of trees, like for maple syruping, is in the spring when the sap is flowing. It's also flowing a little bit in the fall, getting from the tall leaf part of the trees down into the roots to store for the winter. So I must have found one that was still actively sending its sap down. I think it was so cold that most of the others probably had all of their sap down in the root system and not flowing, but that afternoon was amazing. Sweet, sticky sap after 9 days of barely any food at all, just a few very low-calorie berries. It was pretty amazing. You might have noticed, if you look close, when I'm licking that tree, that I have horrid cold sores all over my lips, which I've kind of wondered if perhaps that's maybe part of why I have very little screen time, why I wasn't introduced until episode 3, and why you didn't see very much of me, because my face was a mess. I was sleeping poorly and nowhere near enough, and stressed about my gear because I was still working on finishing my gear until the last minute. And I think the stress of the not sleeping and the stress of pre-launch meant that as soon as I got launched and got to a place where it's like, now I don't have anything to worry about, anything to finish besides just being here on the land. So it was this big relaxation and ease of stress, and that was when the cold sores popped out, as sometimes happens. So yeah, you can kind of see it when I'm licking that birch tree. But I wasn't getting in any protein, and so my lips just wouldn't heal. Right? It's hard to rebuild skin tissue when you don't have protein coming in to rebuild it. So my lips were pretty funky for quite some time. It was really uncomfortable. I did manage to make some salve using some sweet gale, which was growing along the shores of the lake, and using some of the fat from my pemmican, kind of letting some of that fat get warm and ooze out of my pemmican, mixing those two together to make a salve and kind of like a chapstick for my very sad, very cold, sorry, rough lips. Yeah, so that's the story of the birch tree. And then in terms of my shelter, you see me putting a lot of energy towards shelter. So you'll see more of it, I'm sure. But some of the footage is me peeling my poles. And that was a big and really important decision because it was a lot of effort to peel those poles. But I was really thinking long term and thinking about the kind of shelter that I would be totally content and happy to spend a full Arctic winter in, which is a tall order, right? And one of the things in the Arctic going into fall and winter is really low light levels. And so I knew it was going to be really dark in the shelter. So having peeled poles did a bunch of different things for me. One, as you heard me mention briefly, it means those peeled poles are going to reflect the light and reflect the warmth of the fire a lot better than poles with bark on them. So it's going to feel much lighter and warmer in the shelter. Another thing is once you peel them, then all of the moisture can escape. So that means that you're going to have dry poles in your shelter instead of sopping wet poles, and that's going to have way more incidental value. It's going to be way less moisture vapor getting into your shelter, and it's going to feel warm and cozy and like a built structure as opposed to like a dark shack out in the woods. It's almost dusk, so the birds are being really active right now. There's a bunch of quail around me, and there's a catbird, and someone who I don't know singing at the top of these dead cottonwoods right now. Yeah, so my strategy with the shelter was the peeled poles on the inside. So those also were chinked with sphagnum moss, and it gave me this beautiful light interior that also was really cozy. And yeah, what was I going to say? That bird's distracting me. Cut the wind. So the boughs are really nice for insulation, but just on their own, they don't cut the wind. So my plan was a double wall shelter with peeled poles on the inside and unpeeled poles on the outside with boughs and sphagnum moss between them. And so that's what you saw me working on in the footage. Yeah, so that's largely what I wanted to address, was that you don't see a lot of footage of me going after food, and you don't see footage of me fishing. I was fishing a lot. It was just utterly unsuccessful, and there were so many other people fishing, and clearly with a lot better waters for it and a lot more success, that they didn't show that at all. yeah, what else of note about that time? I guess one thing that I was really hoping they might show, but that they didn't, was just the degree to which I was really trying to shift my mindset because I wasn't getting very much food. And I was really trying to focus on being fed by other things. And I felt very, very fed by the wildness of the place, very, very fed by the beauty of the place, very fed by the connection that I felt to the land. You hear some people out there not that excited about the places where they are, but I just absolutely fell in love with my site. Not because it was resource rich. At that point I wasn't getting much, and as I said, I didn't have the blueberries and I didn't have the thick forest or the nice ground cover that you see in some of the other sites. I didn't really have soil. I had rocks and sphagnum moss and spruce forest growing up through sphagnum moss. So that meant I really didn't have much in the way of plants unless they were things that could grow right up through a thick carpet of sphagnum moss. But still, it was the most wonderful, beautiful place, and I really felt a deep sense of connection with the land and a sense of the land really wanting me there, and I felt really fed by that. So first couple weeks, I think we were up to day 12 or so, I was really being fed by beauty. So tonight is episode 4, and it looks like there's some big exciting things afoot. Oh, one thing that I also wanted to mention, which is key and is going to be coming up again and again, if you look at my gear list on the History Channel, you will see that I did not have snare wire. I was planning on bringing snare wire right up until launch, and then the last moment I changed my mind because we had such intense weather. We had snow and sleet and really driving winds that were threatening to push over all of the tents and the eating structures we had set up in the base camp there, and it just seemed so intense. I was thinking about setting up a shelter without paracord, but with snare wire instead, and just knowing that that snare wire was going to get bent until it snapped, whereas paracord would stay flexible forever. So at the last minute, I changed my mind about bringing snare wire instead of paracord, and I brought the paracord. So I was out there without snare wire. And there were a lot of times that I spent kicking myself around that choice. That said, I was really glad to have the paracord, but it was a major handicap not having snare wire. And as I was sitting and watching those episodes and watching Michelle catch that grouse and Jordan catch those rabbits, man, that was hard to see, knowing that I didn't have the items to do that kind of snaring. So, as we shall see, things played out as they did, and things shifted for me a little bit in the foodway over time, which was very gratifying. But yeah, still a lot of big mysteries, but looks like we're gonna see some big game being encountered in the next episode, and I'm really excited to see what happens. And also, I believe there was a shot in the trailer of me looking for something in the woods that I had got with my bow. So yeah, very excited to see that too and to share that all with you. So here we go. Episode 4, Season 6. Hope you'll enjoy watching.